Okay, so what I did is I brought my sketch in as a PNG, as a raster file into Illustrator. Now I'm going to place it, holding down Shift and Option. Basically right on top of my other. This is just to show you the two different ways that you can use raster images in Illustrator. I can use the arrow keys to nudge it, to move it around. This is using what's called the large selection tool in Illustrator, but it's very much like the move tool. It also is like a default Command T. Whenever you're using the large selection tool, it draws a box around your path, or in this case your raster image, and it allows you to stretch it at the corners. Nope, I'm showing you both ways. You only need to bring in your sketch once.
Well, yeah, maybe you need to, it doesn't mean that's.
All right, so now, let's say I didn't have a live traced version that's already a vector to work with, right? Let's say I want to create those shapes on my own. So this is how you can do it. So I'm going to turn that vector layer off. How do I know this is a raster image? Well, because I don't see those individual vector anchor points. I don't see them at all. If I double click on it, I'll get layer options for this image I just brought in. Notice there are no paths because it's just a raster image. I'm going to click on dim images to 50%. And I like to call this my onion skin layer. That's just named after the typical design, cheap plastic spun tracing paper that designers would use, to ink over or plot something over their pencil sketches. So now it's dimmed to 50%. Now I'm going to lock that layer and build a new layer on top of it. And I'm going to label this layer my vector shapes. In fact, I'm going to call it my black vector shapes. And just like when you use the shape tools in Photoshop in our second exercise, I'm going to show you how we can create the shapes we want. Now, my design has a circle in it. In logos, when you have a circle, you tend to have a perfect circle, right? And this is an advantage of just using Illustrator to make your shapes. That sketch is fine, but that is not a perfect circle. Does that make sense? So if I want a more rigid level of control, I'm going to do it in this method. So the first tool that you might want to use is very similar to the Photoshop shape tool. You have your shapes. I'm going to do a perfect circle using the ellipse tool. I'm going to try to find the corner of it. It gives you these helpful guides. I'm going to hold down Shift, and I'll plot a circle. I can move it around with the arrow keys. Okay, so what's the problem with this circle? Yeah, it's filled in completely with black. So now, whenever you make something in Illustrator, there are two things. This is called a path. There's two things that you can play with. You can play with the fill. So in this case, it's filled with black. But you could also play with the stroke. So instead of foreground and background color here, you have the fill and the stroke color. Notice that the stroke has a red line through it. That means no stroke. If I swap those two, I will have a black stroke, but no fill. And the black stroke is just really, really thin, but it's there. So strokes are really, really tempting, but they have some problems. So now that I have a stroke, I have options for the stroke. The options are, how big do I want it to be? Right, just like font sizes, because fonts are vector shapes. So I can find the stroke size I want. I can even play with options of it being wavy, going thick to thin, which is kind of nice for my design. Or being jagged and angular, right? But you have to select it each time. Of being lopsided from beginning to end, that actually might be the one I use. And then you have different stroke types, which we can get into later that you can import in, and in different Illustrator forms, you can have sketchy ones, you can have decorative ones. But here's my problem with strokes. Strokes are size dependent, because just like fonts. A point 12 font on a billboard is not big enough, but it's big enough for a document, right? In the same way, any attributes you give to strokes will change based on the size you make the overall vector. So what I do, if I want to use the stroke as a shape, like as an empty circle, then I right-click on it, and I'm going to say outline. And to outline the stroke means to trace it, not outline. Cancel. I gotta get out of outline mode. I make this mistake every once in a while. So I don't want outline mode, I want regular mode. All right, you see that? So outline mode will show you just the outline around all of your shapes, but it's really annoying. It doesn't actually do anything to your image, it's just a way of looking at it. So I want GPU preview. Okay, anyway, I want to click on my stroke, pick the attributes I want. I think I like this one. And now I want to go to Object, Path, Outline Stroke. When we do text, it's as easy as right-clicking and saying Create Outlines. That's not true for strokes. And when I do that, it will convert it no longer into a stroke, but into a filled path. But the shape is now a much more complex shape, right, than the circle I drew initially. Now that I have that complex shape, I can select it and I can duplicate it. But I don't use Command J. Never use Command J in Illustrator. It's bad. Instead, you just do copy paste. But if you want a perfect duplicate, you do Command C to copy, and then you do Edit Paste in Place, which is Shift Command V. Otherwise, it offsets it. So now I have two copies. I select one and I move it, and I can rotate it, and I can hold down Shift and rotate it exactly opposite, right? I can just move it freehand if I want and have my sketch underneath. And now I have kind of the two circles of my design. Does that make sense? So now we get to a very important part. How do I delete from a path, a filled path? The reason I create strokes and make the strokes an outline is because it's very hard to delete strokes. Strokes need a beginning and an end. And so you can't really control their shape. But if you make it into an outline, you can, because you can erase from filled paths. So using my sketch, I don't want this anymore, that inside line. So what do? I can use the eraser. And if I double click on the eraser, this is why your tablet's helpful, I can set the size. I can even use pressure to vary the size. So that's pressure sensitive. But it's a little bit less intuitive than Photoshop. You have to tell it how much to vary based on pressure and how large it can get. So now I have an eraser that can be really large if I push hard enough. But generally I'm going to be pushing lightly. Also, because I only have that one path selected, I'm not able to erase from the other one. Even though it looks like I'm able to, I'm not. Okay, and I just erase it to where it overlaps with the other path. I might have erased it too much there. Just Command Z to go back. I can always zoom in. It's the same shortcuts for zooming in. Command plus, space bar to move around, right? And I just want an overlap. That's it. Then you can hold down Command to get back to one of the selection tools, whatever tool you're using, which is helpful to deselect. Okay, so now this is what I have. Turn off my onion skin. And that looks okay at the top, but it looks a little clunky at the bottom. So now I'll just use my selection tool, just select this one, and maybe use my arrows to nudge it in a little bit. I want them to be perfect circles, but I want that overlap to be natural looking. And it kind of suggests a moon. That can be nice. So now, this is kind of my favorite part. How do I merge these together? Take this shape and merge it with this shape. So you have to select multiples. You do that by holding down Command, just like you select multiple layers in Photoshop. And you click both of them, and you can hold down Shift until both of them are selected. Or you can do it here. Click one, hold down Shift, click the other. If you want to delete one, you can hit Command, right, to add or delete multiples. So now that I have those two together, I want to merge them into one path. And you do that with what's called the Pathfinder Tool. And you can find it under Window if you can't find it otherwise, Pathfinder. And when you have two shapes overlapping, you can merge them with this option. Or you can cut one out. So let's try some of these different ones. If I do this, it will cut out where they overlap. Right? But I don't want that, so Command Z. If I do this one, it will only keep where they overlap. Command Z. But if I want to merge them, I do that. And now it's all one clean shape. So just from that one circle tool, I've cut out something a lot more complicated. How do I know it's cut out? Well, if I move it, let me save it here, but if I move it onto the gray, there's no white. Right? So you don't make a circle with a hole in it by making a black circle and then a white circle on top of that. It's a little bit more complicated because you need it to all be one solid cutout. Okay, now that I have that, I notice that my leaf overlaps with that transition. So I don't need to worry about the curves there if I'm going for something really clean. But this bottom I do need to worry about. So how do I modify this? Well, this is where I'm going to use the small selection tool. So not the black arrow, but the white arrow. And with the white arrow, I can individually select anchors and pull them, modify them. And when you click on them, you'll see the curves. So this is a good time to point out where there's a handout for you with some nice shortcuts. And if I drag those curves back to the anchor point, it will flatten it out. Right? The other tool, and this is the tool I love most of all, to modify, it's called the pencil tool. And it's underneath the brush. Look in the options. The pencil tool, if you double click, you can set it to be more smooth or more accurate. I like it to be right there. And with the pencil tool, I'll hold Command to select the path. And once I see the anchors, I can redraw them. As long as I start and stop on an existing anchor, it will redraw. But you see, I didn't stop on an existing anchor, so I just drew a new path. But if I stop on an existing anchor, it will redefine that edge. It's like magic scissors. And because I have it set to smooth, it can help smooth this out. But what if I just want to smooth it? Well, then I can use the smooth tool, which is underneath the pencil tool. And it will even out those anchor points. Right? You want to be careful not to use it too much. But notice now it's a nice gradual curve between those two. And that looks better than what it was. All right, I'm going to save it here and show you that handout. You log into Canvas, you get to your digital art page, you go to links, and you'll see, you scroll down, a vector, logo, and Illustrator tips handout. Click on that, and it's a PDF handout. A few pages will show you some. You might just keep that open. It's also going to talk about the pen tool, different options for changing vectors, and about the blob brush, which I'll get into with the next demo. But I want some time to be able to come around and help you guys out. And this is what that handout looks like. And so the smooth tool, very helpful, but don't overuse it.